Today's meditation, we are reading from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 1 to 8. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dishab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the sons of Israel in accordance with everything that the Lord had commanded him to declare to them after he had defeated Sihon, the king of Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Across the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this law, saying, "The Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, 'You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn and set out on your journey and go to the hill country of the Amorites, and to all their neighbors in Arabah, in the hill country, in the lowland, in the Negev, by the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I have placed the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land, which the Lord swore to give to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and their descendants after them.'" The book of Deuteronomy records several important transitions. It records the transition from the first generation of Israelites who died in the wilderness, as we see in the book of Numbers, to the second generation of Israelites who would possess the land of Canaan, as we read in the book of Joshua. It marks the transition of Israel from a nation that dwelt in tents to one that possessed land and dwelt in houses, from a people who lived on manna and water to a people who came into a land flowing with milk and honey, and from a people who were nomadic herdsmen to an agriculture-centered people. Moses is recalling before the new generation the whole journey of the nation from the past to the present, the failures of their fathers and the faithfulness of their God. It was just only 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. But it took 40 years for them to traverse that distance. An honest look into our past and that of our fathers is a good starting point for the rest of our life. If we do not learn from the failures of the past, we are bound to repeat them. Hence, the importance of Deuteronomy, the reflective backward look that gives clarity to the future walk. The story begins with the purpose of their journey and how the Lord had asked them to take possession. Israel was a clan derived from one man's children who were slaves in Egypt for 400 years with no battle experience. The nations that they would conquer in order to possess their land were experienced people with strong walls and cities with battle-hardened men. Yet, they were expected to be strong in the knowledge of God's leading. The area they were asked to possess was huge, bounded by the Mediterranean on the west to the Euphrates on the east, from the Negev in the south to Lebanon in the north. In the modern map of the Middle East, this encompasses the area of Israel, Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, parts of Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, and parts of Egypt. Humanly speaking, Israel has never been able to possess the whole territory promised, even after many centuries of trying. But the promise of God speaks as if the conquest is a simple matter of walking in and taking possession. Such is the power of God's promise when it is taken by faith. Moses recounts the failure of their fathers who were not able to enter it because of unbelief and disobedience. Secondly, Moses recounts how the Lord helped him to share the responsibility of leading the people, how God spoke through his father-in-law to administer the people. It was a reminder of God's grace and provision in leading the people in the wilderness. He also mentions the principles of judgment in verse 17. You are not to show partiality in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You are not to be afraid of any person, for the judgment is God's. The case that is too difficult for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. Thirdly, he mentions the failure of the spies and the unbelief of the people. It was one of the most conspicuous failures of their past. They were only able to see the size of the people and the size of the cities. They were not able to see how great and mighty their God is. Moses recounted and said, I said to you, do not be terrified, not fear them. The Lord your God who goes before you, he will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, just a man carries his son, on all of the road which you have walked until you came to this place. It was not an empty promise. They had seen how the Lord fought for them through the plagues in Egypt. The Red Sea, the provisions of water and manna in the wilderness, the defeat of the Amalekites when attacked without warning or provocation, the protection of God from the harsh elements of the wilderness, the miraculous judgment of God when they sinned, and above all, the very presence of God seen through the fire and thunder that descended on Mount Sinai. Moses sadly said, yet in spite of all this, they refused to trust the Lord your God. There was no excuse for their unbelief. Fourthly, Moses reminded them of the judgment that came upon them because of their unbelief. The harsh reality of their death in the wilderness. After 38 years, almost all of those above 20 had died. Moses, who was then 120, was speaking to a generation of those below 60, almost half his age. There was almost none above 60 except Joshua and Caleb. It is very unusual to have a nation with no senior citizens. Fifthly, he reminds them how their fathers failed to receive the discipline of God and humility. In Hebrews 12 verse 4, we read, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are punished by him. For whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he punishes every son whom he accepts. When God told them that they would never enter the land because of their refusal to believe him, they again refused to submit themselves to his will. Instead, they again disobeyed and went to fight the Amorites, only to suffer a heavy defeat. The recounting of their past served as an instruction for the new generation as they entered the promised land. They were able to understand how they had reached this point in their history. It was important that they understood the failures in faith of their fathers. It is false reverence for our fathers that prevents us from learning from their mistakes and departing from the will of God. We must abide by God's verdict on the past and not our own rose-colored perceptions. At the same time, it was essential that they understand the total reliability and unchanging love of God, because of which the new generation was now offered the chance that their fathers turned down. This remembrance was meant to build faith and courage. Let us look at our past through the eyes of God and take strength and courage in the person and promises of God. God bless.